Welcome to my talk titled, What Do I Do With My Hands and Why Is My Posture So Bad by Jamie Winsor. It's also the same title as my 5th grade dance recital, which I never had. So it's been a big year. Siri still sucks, Lance is still not a size. Opscode changed their name to Chef, making it even more difficult to search for a lightweight resource provider documentation. And Berkshelf is now stewarded by Chef, making it the first community-developed tool driven and managed by Chef. Also, as of Monday, Berkshelf 3 was released. Thank you very much. That was 10 months worth of work or so, very long due. And Berkshelf 3 is about 150 times faster on resolution, maybe more, maybe less. Big, huge thanks to Dan DeLeo at Chef for that. It has much more consistent results with the resolver that's found in the Chef server itself. It's faster uploads, faster downloads, improved cookbook managing, new generators to support different cookbook patterns, and more. If you don't know what Berkshelf is, basically what it is a cookbook manager and dependency resolver. It allows you to allows you to retrieve cookbooks and their dependencies, allows you to package cookbooks and their dependencies, it allows you to author brand new cookbooks. It's a thing that helps you build a workflow, and it should also fit really seamlessly into whatever workflow it is that you currently have. Other big news is that it is now part of something called the Chef Development Kit, or the Chef DK. This is huge. This is a embedded Ruby environment with all the tools that you use in your day-to-day work, Knife, Chef, it's a new tool called Chef, Chef Zero, Berkshelf, Knife Spork, a bunch of great stuff in here. And what's awesome about this is that you can just hand an installer to a developer on your team or an operator on your team. They'll install it, and the things that you wanted them to use will just work without dependency conflicts or gem resolution conflicts or compilation errors or I have Ruby 1.8 and I'm an asshole or, the usual. All right. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Jamie Winsor, and I'm the principal author of Berkshelf. I'm also the core team lead of Berkshelf. These are the 3 members of the core team. That's me on the left, Seth Vargo in the middle, and Michael Ivey on the right. These are the 3 guys that pretty much caused Berkshelf 3 to work. In last July, I made a really, really difficult choice to leave a company that I loved, working on things that I really believed in with super, super close friends. And these guys helped keep me sane going through that time. I ended up wanting to go make some new games, something small, start over. And I joined a company called Undead Labs with a bunch of coworkers from ArenaNet that I used to work with on Guild Wars. They recently built a game for Xbox called State of Decay, which is a zombie apocalypse simulator. It's a single-player game that's out on Xbox 360 and the PC right now. It's about $20. You can download it, and it's actually in Steam's Humble Bundle right now. So I highly recommend it. So the studio's smaller scale, and something about that that's important means that we have to wear multiple hats. My primary responsibility at Undead Labs is to be the lead platform engineer. I built an online game platform, not for this title because it's single player, but future things in 100% Elixir and Erlang where I needed it. But my secondary responsibility was bringing DevOps to Undead. Luckily for me, my mentor and great friend was already working at Undead, and he used Berkshelf and a bunch of tools and would talk to me off hours and brought it there before I even showed up. So I was super fortunate to come into an organization that was already primed and ready to grasp the DevOps culture. So last year I talked about the Berkshelf Way, that was the title of the talk. In that talk, what I wanted to go through was an introduction to Chef. Anyone that had come in, I wanted them to leave the talk understanding how cookbooks worked, what they were for, what Chef did for them. I wanted to introduce cookbook patterns, so that way people would have a common vernacular for how to communicate about different patterns that we were solving, common things that we were doing. There was best practices in cookbook development and how to manage those cookbooks, like stop using roles, use attributes, use encrypted data bags for credentials, a bunch of great stuff, private cookbooks, private attributes, how to avoid pitfalls and how I got there, like how I learned to stop putting my shit in submodules, right? And also, more importantly, how to iterate quickly, because 3 or 4 years ago, like I forgot now how bad it was, but trying to create a cookbook 4 years ago and building a VM, putting it in there and destroying it and going through that whole thing, just change one line and then get a, no method nil on open close bracket. What does that mean? I know what that means now. Well, I mean, I did know what that meant, but it sucks. Anyway, I wrote a talk, and then I rewrote the talk before I even, when I showed up to ChefConf, pretty much. So I hope this doesn't suck. There was about 30% of it that I had to push off to the end, and I'll talk about it again at a future conference. Maybe next month, I'll be talking in Poland at the Atmosphere conference. But there's a lot of great stuff in here. And the part that I pushed off is because we released Berkshelf 3, and I kept hearing the same thing from some really genuinely smart people, by the way. The next slide is kind of a pill to take, but it's also funny because it's like, Berkshelf doesn't work for my workflow. And this is actually a lot of smart people. And this is my response to that, yeah, it does. It's just a dependency resolver. Like, it doesn't do anything special. I know the tool and the model works because we just copied other tools. We filled a hole in the Chef ecosystem that needed to be filled. It's just a dependency resolver at heart. How could it not fit? So if we can agree on these things, automation is dangerous unless it is portable, repeatable, and predictable. If you don't have all of these three things, you're probably going to have chaos in your production environment, and you won't even know why. Or you're going to give something, and you're going to utter my famous favorite phrase, works on my machine, So, if it's not the tool, what is it? And the thing is that software doesn't solve problems. People do. Software is a tool for people to use to solve problems. And you can't expect the software to just be rubbed on your problem, and then it'll be all gone and much better. So I took some creative license with these words, but a really good friend of mine and my engineering manager from Riot told this to me once. He said, if you put the right people in the right room, they'll solve the problems the right way. And I strongly believe in this. I think that it's about people solving problems and not the tool. So I have some bad news. Your workflow might need to change to properly use these tools. But it's not the way that you think it's going to change. It's just slightly. It's how you interact with other teams at your organization. A lot of smart people in this room, and I'm sure at least one of you, please raise your hand if you're part of a DevOps team. Okay, I have some really bad news for you. DevOps is not a team, and it's not a job title either. And a lot of you might know that. If the thing is that you might need to change things. If I told you I'm going to make you fly tomorrow, but you've been walking around wearing weighted boots, and you've gotten really good at wearing these weighted boots. You can run, you can do martial arts with them, you can parkour, whatever people want to do wearing weighted boots, right? But I told you can fly as long as you take those boots off. You're probably going to take those boots off to fly, right? So the thing is that DevOps is a software development pattern or a cultural thing in your organization. It's not something you can hire for. It's not a position, a team, a department, or an organization. I've seen this many times from LinkedIn spammers. Disruptive startup hiring DevOps ninjas and rock stars and whatever the they tell you that they want. I instantly delete these messages from my mailbox because this organization just doesn't even know what they're talking about. Just run away from this. Nope, not going to talk about that. I'm nowhere near that organization. DevOps is about coming together and pair programming. It's about melding developers and operations together. It's nothing about taking control from the developers. Oh, you guys don't know how to operate things in production. Or developers, get out of here, operations. You guys f my shit up all the time. I know how to do it. I wrote it. It worked in Eclipse. So what I want to talk about is the Berkshelf Vision, right? I wish I could rip my shirt off or something. Guys, is that all right? No? Okay. So with this talk this year, there's really one question that I wanted to answer, and that's how do we create a self-contained release? Something that we can generate and give to operations, or something we can generate and give to another one of our developers, or something that we could just use ourselves. And that's what we're going to cover pretty much here. So there's 3 requirements for a self-contained release. First, you need a software artifact. And here in this example, I was originally going to talk about my experiences at Undead building an online platform with OTP applications. The thing is, as I wrote that talk, I realized that I was making a talk for me and not for this room. I'm extremely interested in Elixir and OTP right now because for the last 10 months, I've been heads down working 60 hours a week building something that I'm super proud of. And I want to share that technology with people, but potentially that's not the right place for it here, right now at least. Community track afterwards or a future talk, right? So first things we're going to talk about is the software artifact for the Berkshelf API server, which is a new part of Berkshelf 3 that we could talk about shortly after this. The second thing you need is a cookbook artifact. This is the thing that has all the cookbooks that you use to build that type of server. And the third thing is installation, upgrade, or configuration documentation. People don't know how to use your thing unless they know how to use your thing. You can't imagine that they're going to get something and just know how to use it. So if you're a developer, you should be giving these 3 things to your operations team for every single release. And if you're an operator, you should be receiving these 3 things for your release. But if you're both, if you are actually an embedded operations development team, throw a pizza party because you did it right. That's how you do it. Woo! So with those 3 things, you can build a brand new environment from a specific version. You can upgrade pre-existing environments to a brand new version. You can also promote builds through logical environments. And what I mean by a logical environment, that's not a chef environment. That's a thing like dev. You logically think about this as a development environment, or a staging environment, or a production environment. So, like I mentioned, automation is dangerous unless it's portable, repeatable, and predictable. So with those 3 things in mind, how do we get that thing into production reliably and make sure that we don't have the works on my machine or works in Eclipse scenario? First thing you do with those 3 artifacts, you put them in an artifact server. The PDF's not animated. All right, doesn't matter. He's sitting there like this. I'm just going to animate the GIFs for you. Looks cool on my screen. On my computer, works good on my computer. So artifact servers, there's a bunch of different types. Actually, one that you might not know, GitHub and GitHub Enterprise is actually an artifact server. It's a thing that stores your artifacts for you in self-contained releases. There's also a thing called the Nexus by Sonatype, one called Artifactory, and even a basic authenticated, please authenticate it, over SSL without Heartbleed, sans Heartbleed. An HTTP server could be an artifact server as well, but that's kind of a poor man way to go. The one that I really prefer is GitHub or GitHub Enterprise. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this this UI before, but GitHub releases and release assets is a thing that GitHub introduced about a year ago, maybe. Time's completely wrong, so ignore all that. But this is what it looks like. Here we have, this is actually Berkshelf API, and those are the last 2 versions of it. And that's a self-contained release. There's 4 tars that you can download. One of them is the cookbooks, one of them is actual software, and then there's the source code in a zip or a tar. And what this is doing is it's grouping your built artifacts. So imagine this was compiled software, right? It's grouping these together with the tag, too, for the software. So you know exactly where that software came from, right? So, and you can kind of see the directory layout here. You'll notice that Cookbook is actually inside and tagged with the rest of the software. So let's talk about how we generate those release artifacts. And if you're not a dev, get involved in this process. If you're an operator or an operations team, try to get involved with how these artifacts are generated. Or if you're a release engineer, work with the devs. Don't let the devs give you code and then build, and you somehow build their artifact for them, even though you don't know how that software potentially works, right? And if you're going to be receiving somebody's code drop, don't just say, yeah, we'll make whatever it is work and duct tape some together in production. Get involved in that process. And if you're a dev, open that up for collaboration. Don't feel bad when the operations guy, who's potentially going to get woken up in the middle of the night because your thing doesn't work, wants to know how it works. So the first one we're going to talk about is how to build the software artifact. Step one is, as soon as the build server gets it, it checks it out, it bumps the version number. Then it compiles it and the dependencies, tests that code, and then you want to package it into an artifact, or an archive, sorry. This type, we're just going to use generic tarballs. The next one we're going to do is the cookbook artifact. So the cookbook needs to reside in the same repository as your software if you're developing an application or an environment cookbook, and we'll talk about that in a second. It needs to share the same version number as your compiled software. This makes it simple for that, so that way when you deploy in production, there's no, well, I'm using cookbook version 123, but I'm using software version 042-timestamp. It's the exact same thing. There's no confusion. You can't accidentally deploy the same software. It's a self-contained release. So it deploys that archive of the software matching the cookbook version. And this particular thing we're talking about, which is Berkshelf API, it follows a thing called the Environment Cookbook pattern. Back in December, I blogged about this pattern. It's nearly identical to the application cookbook. It's slightly different in that you usually keep the cookbook with the software, and you intend for that cookbook to manage an entire chef environment. So if you're familiar with berks-api, you would apply the lock file that's included with that cookbook to the chef environment, and then when you run chef, you know that every single version of all those cookbooks is exactly the ones that you thought they were or that you saw in dev or staging. You can generate a new environment cookbook with this command at the bottom. The generators in Berkshelf were updated to allow you to pass a pattern. So application is default. You can give it environment. You can give it library. You can give it wrapper. And then it'll generate you a cookbook in a nice way for those patterns. I talked about those patterns in depth in my last talk. And if you want to check them out, just review it. Or that blog post is on blog.vilestudios.com. So how does it work? The lock file is distributed with a cookbook. It's applied to the chef environment with that berks-api command. And it sets, like I said, that equality lock in the chef environment. So let's look at the Berkshelf API server example. I showed the code directory a little bit a couple slides ago. But basically, the code's in lib, binaries are in bin, the cookbook's in cookbook, and then the cookbook has a Berks file lock. But it's very important that it's committed into version control. That way, your build server doesn't generate a new one every single time, and you didn't have potentially had tested it or understand that your constraints automatically updated, and then it didn't work when it had worked in like your Vagrant VM or something like that. So this is the metadata of a cookbook that lives inside the software repository. If you look near the top, I'm doing a little bit of trickery to figure out the version or have access to the version of that software. And if you look a couple lines down, I'm calling Berkshelf API version. There was actually an important change that was made in Berkshelf 3 to make this possible at all. This dynamic version or long description, often you'll see someone call like io.read on the README file. And then the dependency resolvers were having issues pulling these down because we were evaluating them in place. So the important change is that basically when you upload a cookbook with Berkshelf, it compiles the metadata and gives that to the chef server. Or if you vendor a cookbook or if you package a cookbook, it outputs it into a directory and strips this raw metadata out and only includes the compiled metadata. So you won't run into these like could not evaluate properly exceptions that we were seeing in the past. I'm not sure if you guys had seen those before, but that was something that I ran into when I was trying to implement this pattern. So the next thing is, I'm sorry, if you don't have a Ruby application, you could just also read like a version file from the root of your directory. This is actually how my whole like Elixir application works. It reads a version file, or it could also read Git tags, or any way that you want, and it'll just read it and fill it out for you. So the next part that I want to show you is how to ensure by default the cookbook releases. The cookbook deploys the version of the software or that release of the same version of the cookbook. So this is the attributes file, the default attributes file. And it's setting this attribute, which you could configure. You can make a cookbook deploy a different version of software than it's supposed to. But by default, it's going to call this library function cookbook version and pass the run context, which is actually available in the attribute. And this is the library function for that. So all this does is inspects the run context, pulls out of the cookbook collection the name of the cookbook that we are, and gets its version. It's super simple. I need to have some sort of helper pattern for this, but I copy and paste this everywhere right now, which is like terrible. So how do we generate that cookbook artifact? So we know how it's versioned. How do we make it? It's actually super simple now. You change directory into the cookbook, and you run berks package. And what that's going to do is create an archive or a tar artifact that contains the Berkshelf lock file from the resolution, which is everything that Berkshelf said it was supposed to have with a quality locks, and then a cookbooks directory with a cookbook in each one of them. What's really cool about this is that if you're a Chef Solo user, which Chef Solo is awesome, and we really do love it, you can just give this tar to Chef Solo, and it'll run all those cookbooks for you. Like you don't need to extract them or pull them out or reformat them or do anything. You can even host this at a URL, and it'll just work. You run Chef Solo, you give it like -r, or that's not proper, I don't remember. I'm fumbling now. So how do we release these artifacts into a GitHub release? How do we get them up there? There's a couple ways. So you can use OctoKit and Rake or Thor. Basically, you could also create a release manually and attach the asset. That kind of sucks. But make this part of your build process. Have a script that's called like rake package or make package or rake release that packages the entirety of the software after it's compiled and tested, and then pushes it into a GitHub release that you also create and make a new asset in it. So we've got them up there, but how do we get them out of the computer? The files are in there. How do we get them out of there? So this is a little bit more complicated because it's not part of your build process, and this needs to get dropped down to the cookbook level. So I made 2 cookbooks that I use in every application environment cookbook that I have at Undead, or now that's open source, and the only example of this pattern is Berkshelf API right now. It's a GitHub cookbook, which provides an LWRP for downloading an asset from a GitHub release, or an archive containing the source code from a tag or a branch or a revision. We're going to stick to the releases there, though. And the other one is the libarchive cookbook, which provides you an LWRP for idempotently extracting an archive. Which is funny, like, I can't believe this cookbook didn't exist already. Or if it did, I can't believe I remade it again. Either one, I'm not sure. But it works pretty well. And it will notify the resource chain only if it actually changed something. If nothing was changed, it won't participate in the resource chain. It's pretty neat. So what we do is we add those to our metadata, along with build essential, which you probably will need to get libarchive to work properly. So you just add those to the cookbook, and then open up the recipe. And these 2 resource definitions are super common for any application or environment cookbook that I have. The first one, well, other than setting compile time to true and installing build essentials, the first resource is the GitHub asset resource. And all it's doing is going and downloading that asset berkshell-api-dev from that particular repository from that release number. And I'm assigning that to the variable asset. And that's important because in the very second resource, I'm extracting a tar called berkshell-api-dev that I got, and I'm finding it at the path which the GitHub asset downloaded it to. That's the second line there. Then I'm extracting it to the location that I want, software to be run at, giving it an owner and a group, and then I'm notifying the service, like, hey, by the way, you have something brand new. So the story so far. We've encapsulated the release containing a software artifact and a cookbook artifact, and you wrote and committed a README containing installation configuration instructions, I hope. I didn't go through that through the slide because that's kind of a given. You really need those instructions or people are not going to know how to use your software. And it's located on an artifact server. And bonus round if the release is also tied to the version control ref it was built from. So in this case, if we were using GitHub releases and assets, you have that. You just get it by default. There's one other key thing about why the cookbook should live with the software itself. It brings teams together. So if you remember earlier, I was saying maybe your workflow needs to change. What I was really saying is your organization needs to think about how their teams interact together. If you're an operator, you should be embedded on a team participating in that code base. Even if you don't know Java or Erlang or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You're hugely valuable to that release process. And you should be working in that code base with them on these cookbooks. The thing is that if you also test those cookbooks with Test Kitchen, part of the build process, and it's part of the software, then the build will fail. And like the guy that broke the build is going to wear the I broke the build t-shirt and feel like a giant because he is, because it doesn't deploy properly anymore, which is part of the build process. So now that we have these artifacts and we're working together in a code base, operations and developers, we need to solve distribution. How are we going to get that out onto our production environment or on our dev servers or in EC2, wherever they are? And you could give this to your coworker. He could use Knife, extract things out, upload to the Chef server, apply a run list, bootstrap some nodes. Knife can do the whole job for you. The thing is that Knife, while super powerful, its UX, its user experience, is not amazing. It's difficult to show somebody how to configure it, get it all going, and then how they chain those commands together. So internally at Undead, I wrote a small tool or collection of tools that I recently open sourced called Berkflow. I just can't get enough of that word. This is a Birkenstock. Whoa, yeah. And what it is a cookbook-centric deployment tool, deployment workflow tool. It's super small scale. It's not something that may last forever. This is created and open because it's useful for me. And I know its limitations, but I want people to think about user experience. Don't think we're all smart people, so everyone should know. It's not like that. The better the user experience that you build for people, the better their time's going to be. There's a pain associated with using software, and we want to make that pain as low as possible. And I hope that Berkflow can show people how to create a low-pain user experience for deploying software. So the thing is that what's nice is you can install this into ChefDK, and it'll just work. So there's a small bug in ChefDK right now. You need to use sudo to install gems. But I'm sure that'll be released, that'll be fixed super soon. It's issue 11, and the software's at 001. So it was released Tuesday. So you sudo chef gem install berkflow, which is the name of the binary, BLO, and you have it. Also add it to your path, by the way, because ChefDK won't add gems installed for you. And then you want to install that artifact that we made, that cookbook artifact, into your Chef server. It's a super easy command. Blow install and then the URL or a file path. And you can even shorten install to in, so you can blow in that tar right into the Chef server. Oh, whiskey, I can't quit you. And then upgrading a Chef environment is just as easy. Blow upgrade berks-api-dev, which is the name of the Chef environment. The logical environment there would be dev, by the way. You can see because it's part of the name. Berkshelf API, which is the name of the cookbook. 1.2.1, which is the name of, the version of the software that we're deploying. Or you could upgrade to the latest by saying latest. It'll just look at whatever the latest cookbook is and upgrade your environment. Or you can leave latest off, and it'll just always upgrade to the latest. That does shorten to blow up, everybody. Give this guy a hand. Yeah. And there is no blow me command for everyone It just doesn't exist, Seth. So what we have here is a one-button upgrade. Oh, crap, it's supposed to be animated. I'll do the animation. He goes, boom, an explosion goes off in the back. There's zombies back there. Crap. All right, it looks so good on my machine. All right, so anyway, if you aren't using Berkflow, that's OK. You can still use Knife. You just create an environment. You bootstrap some nodes with an empty run list. Then you add to the run list the recipe, Berkshelf API default, or whatever your application cookbook or environment cookbook it is. Then you run Knife SSH on the machines, or whatever you need, and berks-api to actually apply the locks to the environment, which is the only thing that Berkflow is doing underneath the hood, and it'll upgrade your environment. So that is pretty much this talk so far. Last bit is a plug on if you want to make some games. We're looking for game programmers, producers, animators, and designers. Here's the external resources. These are links to the little bits of the software that I showed. And this is my contact information. So there's a lot of time now to talk about Berkshelf 3. 9 minutes. There is a lot of 9 minutes to talk about Berkshelf 3, this release process, how handsome I am, if this is going to get drink in one shot or not. So let's go ahead. That answer is yes. Anyone? Any questions? I can go back a slide. I can't go back. Oh, I'll use this back button. There you go. So right there in the back, is there a microphone? No. No. Yell it. One more time, I'm sorry.
If Berkshelf 3 is just a dependency resolver, how come it blows up if the dependency doesn't exist?
Question was, if Berkshelf 3 is just a dependency resolver, how come it blows up if the dependency doesn't exist? I think what you mean is it tells you it can't find a solution? The latest version. Berkshelf 3. Don't believe it works that way. What happens if it can't find a dependency is that it gives you a list of things it couldn't find. What it doesn't do right now is tell you super well why it couldn't find them. So like, it's not on the API server or indexed by that, or it wasn't found. Oh, it tells you like it wasn't found at the path or things like that. But transitive dependencies, it has a difficult time finding out, telling you why it couldn't find them. But it should definitely not throw up or explode. If it is, please open an issue, because I just haven't seen that. Anybody else? Right here.
You talked about those exceptions that you were getting with the IO include metadata. So I'm seeing a bunch of those exceptions when you integrate with the product GitHub, and actually a whole bunch of other exceptions too.
One more time, sorry.
So the IO exceptions that you were getting in the metadata,
Yeah.
that still is happening with the private GitHub integration.
Right. So he says that the exceptions are still happening of reading the metadata if you're using the GitHub cache builder in the API server. And the answer to that is that sucks. But that's it. That sucks. I can't do anything about it. The problem is that cookbooks that are in GitHub are not finalized artifacts. That's a thing that has a version number, but there's a bunch of refs in that version control system that also have that same version number. So it's actually impossible to identify what is the actual cookbook, and we don't commit compiled metadata. So the thing is that because the raw metadata is pure Ruby, I know that most people do the IO read thing just because it's part of the generators. But you could put anything you want in there. And you could put like dangerous stuff in there too, because it's just pure Ruby executing on somebody's machine, right? So the thing is that has to be evaluated in a clean room, and we can't give you access to every possible thing to evaluate. And we also don't know what directory it was in before, if it was part of like a particular CD pipeline. So the answer is don't use that cache builder. I'm actually going to add a warning when you start the API server that says, hey, you're using this thing that I really don't think you should be using. The only reason it was added into the core of Berkshelf API is because so many people asked for it, and we want to create something that alienated people. But we do want to have people see why it's a bad idea, and then maybe not do that one anymore.
So in that case, how would you build a cache for a private GitHub repo?
Don't build a cache for a GitHub repo. Use finalized artifacts. You have to take those and then put them somewhere. Build that archive, build that tar, that artifact, and put it somewhere. So you can use GitHub, you could use Nexus. The Chef server is actually an artifact store for cookbooks. And it has the compiled metadata there, and it's completely safe to index a Chef server because it has those finalized artifacts. When you upload a cookbook with Berkshelf, it freezes it on the server. So that way you can't change it. It's finalized, it's done. You can't change that out from underneath somebody else. Does that make sense? Okay.
So on that note about, will there still be an API server for the Chef community website, and will that be stable and for a long time?
Yeah, so he says, will there still be an API server for the community site, and will it be stable? First answer is, it would be great if the new supermarket actually just provides the data that I expect from what my API server would give, what our API server would give. And that's what Chef is working on right now. I believe I talked to Seth earlier, and he says like that's a thing. So that'd be awesome if that could just be a source in the Berkshelf, the Berks file. And the other thing is about the stability of the API server. The thing is that I originally was paying for the hosting, and I put it on Heroku. And it's not, Heroku's good, it's awesome, but it's not my favorite for highly available services. I believe that Chef wants to take over the hosting. I'm not paying for it anymore, Riot is, that's awesome. But Chef's gonna take over that, and I hope, and I'm so positively sure that they will not want to run it on Heroku. So not that Heroku's bad, it's just we want highly available. Yeah, so yes, it'll get better. Anybody else? Right there? Sure. So his question is, if I have a cookbook that depends on other cookbooks, so we have like an application or environment cookbook that depends on these other things, do I have to push updates of those other dependent cookbooks somewhere so that way my primary application or environment cookbook can leverage them? And the answer is yes. Yes, you need to release changes. That's software, just like anything else. The GitHub and libarchive cookbook here are library cookbooks. They don't do anything but provide you with an LWRP, right? And those are versioned and released to the community site. They could be, if they were internal cookbooks like I do have in my organization, to my Chef server. And they become available to anybody else, and that's how they're finalized. And there's a build, like a rake script in each one of these cookbooks that has that logic for how to create a release. It's super simple if you have a Chef server, because all you do is you tag the current ref, you package that cookbook and then upload it to the Chef server, and it pushes the tags to GitHub, and you just cut a release. But yeah, instead of depending on the master branch of all these subsidiary little library cookbooks, cut full releases instead. As your organization grows and your infrastructure gets bigger, you'll be wearing those weighted boots, and you're good at it right now. But if you get up to like 1,600 people, like 400 developer size, and they're all making things at, whatever, and you're a team of like 3 guys on a deployment automation tool team, it gets insane. You won't be able to do it. It's so hard. So please release full artifacts. Yeah? That's why GitHub works. That's why path and GitHub locations work. That's completely what that's for. Development, absolutely. we got to go now, but I'll be around to track the community chat room. Any questions, I really would be very happy to answer, and especially finish that one up.